Hello, my friends. I hope you had a fantastic day, evening, or night, wherever you are. This week, I'm back with Sandi Marshall, talking about how you can deal with stress, how you can channel your vision into getting where you're looking for, regardless of what happens with this economy and with this interesting time and this interesting environment that we're moving through as business owners. So thank you ever so much for coming back once again. And I'm now going to hand over to past me to introduce and talk through this interview. And I'll see you in just a moment's time.
Yes, so I'm Sandi Marshall, Sandi Marshall Stress Management, qualified as a stress management coach, which basically means I can sit, talk to people and help people sort their shit out and live their best life. Used to work with corporates doing mental health awareness for employees. Got a little bit disillusioned with that and decided that I wanted to work with people on an individual basis. So I've been away from it for quite a little while now and sorting my own shit out. And now I'm back.
Firstly, welcome back and thank you for the time on the show.
Thank
I think
you.
it's a really interesting world that we're living in right now, right? Because there's a lot of economic pressure, I think would be the terminology. Mm-hmm. And I think so many people react to pressure or react to stress or react to these things differently, right? We were talking a little bit before the show about the difference between what I would describe as being a bitch, which is like, oh, I don't feel like it, oh, my head's not in the game, etc. But you are completely capable of doing it. You're not overly stressed. You haven't really been pushing, etc. You're just you just can't be asked, right? And then a level of burnout or a level of like focus, because I've had it in my career a lot, because I'm notoriously known for working a lot, right? I'm pushing really hard. But always, like when I say, people say, "Oh, Colin, you're working too hard," or "Oh, I'm worried about you," etc. Now, there's normally, in my experience, like two reasons why people do that. Number one, they don't want you to kind of do more than they've done from an achievement point of view, right? So there's that kind of like ego kind of playing in a little bit there. But also, they're pushing their own limits onto you, right? So if their limit is 8 hours a day, okay, well, when I do 9, they're like, "Oh, careful. You might burn yourself out, careful," because they can't do 9, or they can't do 10, or they can't do 12, or they can't, just hours, right? For a very key example. But how does, I guess, an employer, someone, an entrepreneur, sort of start to tell that difference and really, in your opinion, I guess, find their limits, find what's possible, right? And I guess start feeling out that difference between they're maybe not pushing themselves as hard as they honestly could be, if they're actually honest with themselves, and actually, hold on a second, no, my body's actually, and my mind and everything's like starting to break and get to breaking point, and we're in a burnout territory, technically.
Well, first of all, I want to disagree with you, because I think there's a third string to that particular bow. And when people speak to you and say, actually, I'm really worried about you because the amount of hours you're working could really mean I'm really worried about you because of the amount of hours you're working. No agenda, just concern. And I think for me that's one of the keys. It's employers, other employees, colleagues to look after each other and then keep an eye open for each other. And when people start to perhaps perform badly, rather than getting the big stick and saying, "You're not performing, you need to do this, you need to do that," really, employers, managers, they need to ask the question. They need to find out why. And as you say, we were talking before we started recording, and I don't see why. I kind of, in some ways I do from a financial point of view, but I think it's really harsh when people that are good at their job are pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed, literally to breaking point, because the bar is constantly raised. If you hit your targets of, let's say, 100,000, I don't know, sales, whatever, then your boss will come along and say, "Hey, you did really well with that. We're going to put you up to 125,000." It doesn't matter that you really busted a gut to get that 100,000. And it could be that extra 25,000 that just pushes you over the top and tips you into burnout. Recently speaking to somebody in that kind of situation, and was told, well, targets aren't going to drop. That's just the way it is. So now that person's looking for another job. And it's a real shame because that person's extraordinarily good at their job and has brought a lot of work into the company. So now they're going to lose that person. So they've got to have the cost of recruiting somebody else, training somebody else. Why not allow that person to plateau at the figure of 100,000, bring somebody else into the business to train up to increase the revenue further?
I think it's an approach change, but also it's maybe a comfort level, because like as a business owner, you look at the cost of that and go, okay, that's going to cost me X amount, right? But the other side of that coin is actually what's the opportunity cost of letting that person go, right? As well, right? And sometimes I don't think business owners think about what the opportunity cost of not sending the email, not having that outreach, not making that phone call, not making that connection, not keeping that member of staff on, happy, etc. Before we get too into the weeds on that, how would you describe burnout for those who don't know? Because there's lots, we can sit here and say burnout, right? But there's a lot of people who I don't think actually understand what it is. And by no means am I an expert on it. But we all have a rough definition of what it is. But I think there's a lot of misconceptions that come from what burnout really is. So how would you describe, in layman's terms, how would you describe what burnout is as an entity, as a feeling, as something that happens?
Burnout is individual. It's exactly the same as stress, all that kind of thing. It is about the individual. No two people that are suffering from burnout are going to be experiencing exactly the same thing. But, for example, things like not being able to sleep properly, no work-life balance, so you're taking your work home with you, going into work, that feeling of overwhelm when you go into work and you see what's got to be done, not wanting to open an email because you're worried about what may or may not be in it, not being able to think clearly, literally exactly the same, very, very similar symptoms to just stress, but it is more work related. It's horrible. It's horrible. One of my clients said to me that they feel broken. I mean, you've known me a while, and sometimes I really do like, or a lot of the time I connect with my clients, and for my clients to turn around and say to me, Sandi, I feel broken, literally just broke my heart. And no job is worth that.
I paused because I was thinking where to take this, but I think I'll go this way. For me personally, I think there's a very clear question that one needs to ask themselves, right? Which is understanding where the vision is that they have connected to what they're doing, right? Because I have taken work home. I'm notoriously known, as I alluded to at the start of the show, for working 12 hours and having no work-life balance, right? But I've made a commitment for the period of time that I'm currently in this stage of my life, for that decision to take place, right? I'm aware of why.
Let me stop you there. Let me ask you a question. Yeah. Was that your choice, or did somebody say to you, this is what you have to do?
Because I made the choice to go self-employed, and I made the choice to build a company, so it's on my terms, and this is the difference, right? What I'm doing is building something for me, and there's a lot of passion and reason and drive behind it, and also, actually, arguably, I would actually be probably doing what I now do commercially and have done commercially for 6.5 years for free, for fun. Outside of work time, I would have done this anyway, right? And I did for a long time, right? So for me, it's slightly different. I would do what I do commercially outside of office hours anyway, right? So I think there's a difference in disparity, and this is why I said it's very personal. It's a very vision-based thing. If your vision is to climb the corporate ladder, okay, it's not my idea of fun, but if you want to do that, knock yourself out. The point I guess I'm making is sometimes in certain periods of life when you have to, sometimes if you get into financial hardship and etc., the only solution to that problem is what could be described as eating shit for a period of time, right? In some cases, during that eating shit period, you have to push beyond what's comfortable, beyond what's necessary. I'm not saying live in burnout. I'm saying maybe push slightly beyond what you would expect and what would be comfortable or normal, right? I think there's a very strong difference between what I'm describing, which is vision-based, passion-based. I'm creating something for my own legacy. I'm creating something for me. It's on my terms. Blah 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 blah. Because I had this conversation with my mum yesterday, and it was like, I do all of this because I want to, and because I'm building it for me. I'm not doing it because someone said I should. So our boss is telling me to, right? Because I wouldn't do it, right? I wouldn't work 12 hours for someone else, right? I just wouldn't, right?
Right, but somebody else, yeah, is doing all the work that you're doing, yeah, with the same amount of passion, but because they're being told to.
Which is,
and the difference, again, that there is a difference there, because because of your experiences, how to look after your mental health, how to look after your physical health, how to recognize the signs and symptoms if you did start to suffer from burnout, and you would know what to do. But there's a load of people out there, Carlton, that have got no idea.
100%. And I'm, for the record, for the audience members that maybe, don't know me as well as you do, I'm a massive advocate for mental health. I think men need to talk about it a lot more. I've been ex-suicide. I've been everywhere there is, right? Like mental health wise. So I can speak with a level of conviction from my own story and my own reality. But I'm saying that from a place of, I know how dark it can get, and this is a better reality, right? But it comes from a place of me fully understanding my own body, fully understanding my own mind, and fully understanding that this is my own personal vision and my own personal journey. And whenever I talk about stress or stress management or mental health or vision or mindset or any of these kind of buzzwordy stuff, it's always around what's your vision. It's always around why specifically should we look, or should I look, to build or create something, and what does that mean, and am I willing to make that sacrifice, and how much of a sacrifice is it really, right? Because we say, I'm going to work these 12 hours or 15 hours, but as I said, 95% of what I'm doing for commercial work now, I would be doing for free anyway. So what is that a sacrifice? Not really. Let's be honest, it's not, right? Actually, what I'm doing is finding a way to monetize a skill set and finding a way to monetize me running around with a camera. Great, fantastic. I'm fully aware that I'm very fortunate, I'm very grateful, I'm very lucky to be able to do that. But moving slightly back into corporate, and that's what I think where it can get a bit too commercial, a bit too, we're going to push people, because I'm all for sales related commissions and sales related and making money in it as much as the next person. But the issue comes when it's not on your terms, which is what we kind of alluded to a minute ago, which was like you're pushing people to the point of breaking and they actually hate where they are, and are not to the point where it's like, I'm just going to do... I think there's a difference for me anyway between understanding this is what's necessary to get yourself out of the position you're taking 100% ownership that you caused. Let's say, for example, you're in 10K's worth of debt, for example, right? Actually, arguably, was that your fault? Was there, if you're really honest with yourself, you take 100% accountability, was that your fault? If yes, okay, it's 100% your fault or 100% your reality to get yourself out of that problem. And during that problem, in fixing that problem, it will require you to be uncomfortable and probably work significantly harder than someone who isn't in 10K's worth of debt, for example, right? I think there is still elements, though, where you have to, even if you're in that situation, watch burnout, because what your body will end up doing, I don't know, because I can balance it hopefully quite well. We'll see. In my experience anyway, I have managed to, is it will just shut down. Your body will just get to the point where, nah, we're not doing this. And I think sometimes we don't listen. I think especially when I was a lot younger, which always is weird for me to say, is still young, still a useful person. But how does someone, I guess the question there is, what signs can someone look for? I know it's very personal, but there is going to be some yardsticks that's like, you might want to look at stuff here.
Yeah, it's like I said before. We're talking about things like lack of sleep, emotional outbursts, mood swings, there being no clear divide between work life. But I think we're kind of getting on to, I think we're getting away from the point. We're talking about maybe ourselves as business owners, So we have a choice. We have a choice to step back, and we can talk about the individual recognizing that they are beginning to suffer from burnout. But if that's not something that the employer understands, we're literally banging our head against a brick wall. And I believe that there is a legal responsibility for employers to look after their employees' mental health as well as their physical health. And it's something that I think employers need to take more notice of. They need to understand, they need to create that support system. And when somebody genuinely comes in to see their boss and says, listen, I've peaked, this is breaking me now, they have to listen. The bosses have to listen, and they have to start reacting accordingly, not just saying, well, that's the way it is.
Yeah. I think there's...
So, and regardless of people's financial circumstances, that's a fact. We can't continue to work people into the ground.
I think that, I guess it comes from the hustle culture concept, whether you're corporate or whether you're in business. But the reason why I started on the personal side is you need to firstly understand, are you burnt out, right? Number one, are you there? Are you there mentally? Are you there, etc., right? But then, okay, I guess then let's open up the question then. Let's say someone listening here is in corporate and they do feel like they are, and maybe their management, maybe their boss, they don't know how they're going to be receptive. How would you, if you were going to give advice, how would you suggest, how would you approach, how would you advise someone tries to go to their management to explain it? Because I think for me, I would try and say, look, I'm happy to do what's necessary within reason, etc., etc. There is obviously a cost here, so on, but for me, it's about actually kind of connecting with them on a human level to see what the issue is, to see where because the job of a manager, right, is to fix people-related problems. That's the job of a manager. That's the job of management. That's the job of etc. People management, right? So how would you, from an employee, from a person who's close to or soon to be, hopefully not, but soon to be potentially burnt out or feeling that way, how would you recommend they tackle that conversation, right? Because I think also part of the issue is they may also get themselves in more of an emotional state and more anxiety and more stress and more because of the fact they have to have this conversation or they want to have this conversation to see if they can. So it's kind of a catch-22, isn't it?
It is, but in my head, the conversations need to come from the top down. There needs to be a culture within businesses that allows people the freedom and the space to go and speak to their line managers and be honest, and explain how they're feeling. They need to have that safe space. So for me, the onus isn't on the individual to always stand up and say, hey, it's me, I'm suffering from burnout, what are you going to do about it? The employers need to create a culture where an individual feels empowered to be able to go in and say, look, I'm not in a great place.
Okay. Does that come from, I guess, one-to-one management side, like as in like having catch-up meetings, etc., or would you say that's more of a safe space reality?
It needs to be built into the culture of the business. People need to be encouraged. They need. I'll tell you who I follow and that I think is absolutely amazing is Paul Kincaid, Forensic Leadership, and he talks a lot about the best way to manage people and the way to get the best out of your people. And it's not through sticks, it's through carrots. And the carrot is as much getting to know your employees. And people say to me, well, if you've got 300 people on the ground and you've only got one MD, I get it, you've got a pyramid. But above the 300 people, you've got what? A group of 20 odd supervisors maybe, or the next level up. Yeah, you're not just talking the workforce at the bottom of the pyramid and one person at the top. It is a culture that needs to come from the top, trickle down through the pyramid so that every member of staff feels that they have got somebody that they can go and talk to and say, listen, I've got a problem with that. Whether it's a colleague, whether it's a manager, whether it's a supervisor, it is a culture within a business.
I mean, there's a couple of points I'll go here, but I was browsing LinkedIn this morning, and I came across a clip from the Culture Guy, or Ben, who I've had on the show, and you may know as well. And he was talking on a podcast about I think it was an experiment or something he did with a client, which was basically increased the amount of holidays that every employee could have to unlimited, and basically just made it so that it was very simple and very easy to kind of balance this work-life balance, and there wasn't necessarily this massive approval process or this anxiety around it, right, was the crux. And if I can find it, I'll leave a link in the description for those who are interested. And the crux of it was, if you treat people like adults, you will get them to respond like adults, right? And I'd be curious to hear your views or your thoughts on how that, because also I've heard it across, like Stephen Bartlett did it, I heard loads, and also we've seen it a lot with remote working as well, with this kind of balance and this shift around. I guess there's kind of two camps when it comes to remote as well, which is like, yes, it can work, or actually, no, I need everyone in the office, right? But moving, just before we move on to remote, the holiday thing, or the treating adult, the clip, as I say, which I think for me is a really interesting example of actually putting the emphasis, or putting the respect and putting the responsibility and the trust into your staff to actually, I guess in some ways, not take the piss, but also know what they need, right? I think is the crux there. I mean, what would you say to maybe someone who's listening to this who does run a business and maybe has 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 100, however many employees, about that system, about that idea? Because that can be quite a ballsy decision, right? And Ben even mentioned this as well. It's like, this could cost the company huge amounts of money, right? Because of lots of different reasons, you still have to pay people even when they go on holiday when they're an employee, right? So to the cost of the business, this could be significant, but the output may massively fall through the floor. But actually, from what Ben found and others have found, the result actually isn't that at all. It's.
I think it's a really interesting concept. But again, it's kind of like one size doesn't fit all. And I think you do have individuals. I always use the example. You've got 2 employees. One of them, you might be able to turn around and say, right, this is the project brief. Take it away, read it, get it done. If you've got any questions, come back and see me. And however long later, that person will walk back into the office and say, there you go, there's a project delivered. You might have somebody of equal capability, but they work a different way. And they need to be a little bit more micromanaged. They need to have that project brief given to them in chunks. They need to have the space to report back on a regular basis. So different people work different ways. And I hate to tell you this, but you're going to get exactly the same answer out of me when we talk about remote working. And it's about, for me, it's about employers playing to their employees' strengths. I mean, the whole holiday thing, I think it sounds great. And you're going to get people that actually thrive in that culture. But equally, you might have people that don't do so well in that culture and need a little bit more structure.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's lots of parallels that I could give here, which is like university, right? Do you need that structured education, or can you go and do an online course? Okay, arguably you could get the same education from what you know from the same 2 things, right? Number 1, right? Take the right course, fantastic, got it. Or go to uni, fantastic, also get it too, right? But there's pros and cons to both, right? The same with remote working, the same with 4-day week, the same with unlimited holidays, etc., right? But I think the larger question, which is really important to mention, the reason why I wanted to mention it, is understanding, and this is kind of where it leans into that vision thing that I mentioned earlier, which is around what either motivates the person, right? So the employee, or actually where are they in their life, right? What stage are they in their life? You know, I remember watching a video a while ago from Gary Vaynerchuk talking about this, where when some of his employees were 20, they wanted to work weekends, they wanted to work all the hours, they were very career driven, they wanted to climb, make all this money. Then they suddenly have children. Then they're suddenly in their 30s, and all their priorities completely shift, right? They want their evenings, they want their weekends, they want their holidays, they want the summer holidays off, etc. And that's why I think it's very important for everyone listening to this, whether you're an employee, whether you're in corporate, whether you're a manager, whether you're employee, when you're working for yourself, whatever you do. Firstly, ask yourself, is it in line with where you are in your life in regards to what you're trying to achieve? Number one. Number two, is that going to be, and are you okay with the fact that that might change in a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, however long, right? And actually, are you in a position where you can be malleable, either with your management, either with your leadership, or as a business owner? Can you twist, and actually I'd argue as a business owner, you can definitely do this because you're the one who calls the shots, right? I can control, and one of the main perks of me being a business owner is I control how much I work, when I work, and etc. Right? Now that goes the other way too. If I get complacent, it's very possible I don't make as much money as I need to and or make as much money at all because it's all down to me. But that's a different lifestyle. And that's what I say to people when they ask me, oh, should I start my own business? I'm like, well, are you self-driven? Are you self-motivated? Can you get stuff done? In using your example, can you go and do the project without having to have someone to, go back to check in with? And or if you do need that, can you find a business partner or someone you can work closely with to help you being able to do that, right? But for those who, because there is some people who are younger who are still trying to find their feet in their career, they really, they don't really know where they want to go, etc. How would you suggest? How would one find that vision? How would one find that way of working? Because for me, I know very simply, as you were mentioning, I'm the kind of person, just give me the brief, I'll go knock it out, I'll get it done. I don't want to be micromanaged. I don't like being micromanaged. I'm going to do it my way. I'm going to get it done. I'm going to get you results. But I need to just be kind of, in some ways, just leave me alone to play in the sandpit for a bit, right? And I'll come up with a solution, right? But
when you're younger, it's like anything. When you're younger, your brain is constantly developing, and you will find your way. And one of the things that I find with the younger generation, I can say that now I'm old, but one of the things that I find with the younger generation is they are much more confident in standing up and saying, well, actually, yeah, that way works for me and that way doesn't. And I do think that's a generational thing, and I think it's amazing. And I also think that now there's a lot more conversations around mental health, burnout. I mean, a few years ago, burnout wasn't even a thing, and now it's got a title and it is recognised. So yeah, I think the world is changing, and I think the younger generation are helping it change. And LinkedIn and all kinds of social media. I mean, the press around National Suicide Day yesterday was just phenomenal, and that would never have been seen a few years ago. And I'm really pleased. The world in which we're living is slowly changing. There's still an awful lot more that needs to change, but yeah, it is slowly changing.
Something that did jump to mind to me has been interesting as my podcast career and etc. and what I'm doing is changing, about like me having conversations. I think there's so many people who will deliberately, in some ways, only have conversations with people who are going to agree with them. Right, so we can be very echo chambery in that respect. We surround ourselves with people who maybe from a political point of view we agree with, or from an ideology point of view we agree with, or we both support the same football team, or whatever it may be. Right, we all sort of synergize and connect. And for me, as I've sort of grown and developed, I've actually gone, well, that's really boring. Right, I know what I believe, I know why I stand for those things, and I know where I sit on those morals. Right, but also I have the respect for everyone else if they don't hold those. But also I think something which is missing to an extent in the culture of now, whatever that means, is the ability for people to have a conversation with someone who doesn't necessarily agree, maybe slightly or maybe completely, with their ideology, with their views, with their opinion. And if they do, it goes into this concept of, I'm going to be aggressive and emotional with you instead of having the respect and actually not talking over each other and able to have an adult, what I would call an adult conversation, as I alluded to earlier about treating people like adults. I think that's the interesting thing about the moment, because there's a lot of conversations, but they just end up being noise, right? Because there's just a lot of energy and a lot of, which I get, people are passionate, I understand that, sure. But I guess in some ways, I think that's part of the reason, moving it back to the topic of this conversation, about maybe why sometimes people won't, either managers won't consider it or won't think about it because, yeah, okay, cool, it isn't in the culture, fine. But that takes time to develop into the culture. But also, they don't want to, I guess in some ways, open up that level of conflict or open up that potential conflict, even though it's actually important. And that's how change is made, in my opinion, by having those conversations with views that don't necessarily align, right? So if you're someone who's like very against remote working, if you don't have conversations with people who are very for remote working, you won't get it. You're just going to still be on your ideology of, and you might come out of the conversation saying, actually, no, I still think that remote working isn't a good idea. Okay, fine. But actually, surely part of this, or part of dealing with stress relief, or actually dealing with that level of burnout or that level of understanding in an organization, is actually the ability to be able to articulate as a concept, right? Actually either have the confidence to be able to articulate to your manager or to whoever, but then also be able to articulate your own views yourself and actually say, no, I don't agree with you. Because I think, you know what I mean? Because I think there's a lot of it that's kind of like, I have to say the things that I should say regardless of whether I agree with them.
I think there needs to be, again, a safe space to have those conversations. And I think that a lot of what you were talking about is people not feeling able to air their views. I think a lot of that stems from social media. I think the world, says us, like doing a podcast with Zoom. But I think there is a tremendous amount of negativity in the world of social media. I see it every day on Facebook, not so much on LinkedIn. The vile responses to some people's thoughts and ideas. But I think when you actually have a safe space to have a conversation, that can all change. And whilst the younger generation are making strides in having those conversations, they're also extremely guilty of having very one-sided conversations on social media. It's my way or no way. And I think, unfortunately, social media is a safe space for people to be cruel.
I think it's because of that level of anonymity that one can potentially have, right?
Yeah.
But the conversation I always have, because I get it all the time, it's like, oh my God, what if you get a hate comment? Oh my God, etc., etc. And I'm like, okay, firstly, let's establish, is it a hate comment or is it constructive criticism that's uncomfortable that you don't like? Okay? They're not the same. If it is a hate comment, what power are you giving it by replying to it? Number one. Number two, why do you need to, like, what happens if that you read that hate comment and nothing else happens after that? What actually changes in your life?
But even in the reading of that hate comment, the act has happened. The feeling, the response has happened.
But I think maybe I'm just hardened to it, right? Because I've been on the internet from a very young age. It's very possible I'm hardened to it, but actually, arguably, one should be hardened to it, and they should, to an extent, know what they stand for and know what they agree. And I'm not saying you fight to die for it necessarily. I'm saying understand what you do and do not agree with and say, actually, no, I'm willing to say no. Now, we should answer this by saying, you know, we can only say this because we're in a culture that will allow us to say this, where I'm not threatened with death if I disagree with certain things, for example, right? So I'm very aware of that. But I guess the principle that comes from it is, okay, let's go the other way, actually. In a culture where that's accepted, in a business, in a corporate, in a business, you know, in a society where we are, let's be honest, all looking to make money, right? Whether you're a business owner, whether you are an employee, whether you are a managing director, whether you're we're all looking to make money, whether that's for a salary, e.g., in exchange for time to then develop a company, or build a company, or work for a company, or yourself being the solo entrepreneur and or building a company to then employ people. We've talked about what the costs are of not doing it, right? But what are the costs of doing it? What is the cost of actually looking, outside of the legal obligations, right? Of course. But surely there is increased productivity. There's a multitude of reasons that are actually heavily positive or hugely positive to actually why we should care in general, right? What would you say those benefits are for either an employee or for, let's be honest, the revenue stream? We talked about, we talked at the beginning about that 100K example. If the culture is increased and the culture is better, what would you say is the positives? Because I think some people are going to look at this and go, well, that's all very nice, but it's going to take me a lot of time and energy, and what's the benefit?
I mean, obviously, the financial benefit of people bringing in, like hitting increased targets over and over and over, is phenomenal for businesses. And don't get me wrong, I'm certainly not knocking that. And if an individual is capable of having those targets increased year on year by 10%, 20%, whatever it is, then go for it. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that, and everybody benefits. But what I'm saying is that the people whose health is being sacrificed, mental and physical, by having those targets imposed on them, non-negotiable targets imposed on them, that's where the system fails. So yeah, there is nothing wrong with people going out there, entrepreneurs, big business, whoever it is. There is absolutely nothing wrong with them going out there and raising targets, hitting targets, raising targets, hitting targets, and just staying on that merry-go-round, provided they are mentally fit, they are healthy, and they are, in essence, cared for by their employer, or they have a certain amount of self-care, that they have that understanding.
I think also, though, wouldn't it decrease the staff turnover rate if this environment is a prosperous one where there can be that shift, right? Let's say, for example, I remember Simon Sinek talking about it. Instead of going to someone who isn't performing and say, oh my God, why are you not performing, etc., 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 that level of aggression or that level of like hostility around it, going, hey, look, I've noticed that you haven't been hitting the targets, or you haven't been, etc. You okay? Right? Like, what's going on? What's happened? Is there something going on, etc., etc.? And the crux of what he was saying was around, there was his experience with his own businesses where someone had a bereavement in the family, and he didn't mention it at all. Right? So of course that's going to change things. Of course that's going to, you're not going to perform at the same level, right? Of course not. But I think for me, if a business entrepreneur, business owner, manager, etc., can help develop a culture where they can actually, and I hate saying it because it feels a bit counterintuitive in some ways and a bit corny, but actually care about their employees. Not like, we care. No, actually do.
Listen, caring about somebody, showing empathy to somebody, doesn't have to be touchy-feely and all woo-woo. You know me, I don't do woo-woo. I never have done woo-woo. But being able to stand and have a conversation, or sit and have a conversation with somebody and say, tell me what's going on. Yeah, talk to me. Let me support you. That's not woo-woo. That's not touchy-feely. That's just being a human being towards another human being. And I think in big business, in some corporates, that is what we've lost. That is what we've lost. And we need to get that back. If we're going to have the targets for people to hit, if we're going to have constantly looking for increased revenue, we have to have the care and the empathy that go along with it. I mean, you're talking about, before you were talking about sort of 4-day weeks and unlimited holiday and looking how people perform. Why has that been thought of? Why is that suddenly a thing? Because somebody has actually sat back and said, hey, working these guys 12 hours a day, 5 days a week, it's not working. I care about my people. What can I do differently to try and change this culture? That has come from a place of care, a place of empathy. And yeah, I can't wait to see the results. And I really hope that the results are positive, because again, it's something else that could change the way we work. But up until COVID, and still now to a certain extent, we were working in a way that in my head is not sustainable. If somebody doesn't perform, let's get rid of them. Let's discipline them. Yeah, let's use a stick. Let's beat them into submission. And that doesn't work.
Yeah. No, I completely agree, and I think it's this principle of, number one, as I said earlier, understanding what people's vision is, understanding where they are in their life. As I say, like 20 go-getter, they're going to want extra hours. They're going to want to be career-driven. They're going to want to see how they can go up the chain, right? But actually, when they're 30, 40, etc., and then they have children, maybe not. Right? Maybe they're actually more care about their work-life balance and they actually want to be home more, and etc., etc. But I think for me, having these options is great. But I think what we really need to look at, from my point of view at least, is what community karma or what business karma do you create? Because by genuinely caring about your employees, your people, etc., however you want to articulate it, you actually build karma with them, so that, you know, look, let's say you were really understanding because of a bereavement or a breakup or whatever that it was, right? And that time they're going through, whatever that may be, right? It could just be their parents ill or their dogs just died or so on, right? Like there's a multitude of reasons that could cause the same reality. Okay, but when they come through that and when they heal, they're going to be more assertive, more driven, more thankful, etc. So you can, it's kind of this yardstick, right? This balancing out between the two. But I think you actually gain more from people once you're there, right? Because you gain more. I guess you gain more trust. I guess you gain more. I guess malleable. I don't know. It's quite hard to describe, but I think you get more from people when you can be that empathetic.
Can I use the word loyalty? It builds loyalty in your employees. And I don't necessarily agree that it builds assertiveness. It builds loyalty. It builds trust, and it builds a culture of that can be built with. It builds a. That's really wrong grammar. But if one person in an organisation feels supported, feels that they are cared about, that is what will trickle down through the business.
Yeah, and I think also it will kind of breed an environment where also they then care about the people around them, and so on 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 as well, right? Which
Exactly.
which can only have a net positive.
It's not. It's not about assertiveness. We all need to be assertive sometimes, but if you feel that you can go into your employer and you can have a proper conversation with somebody that's going to listen to you, you don't need to be assertive. You don't need to go in banging the table. You just need to go in and sit and talk.
Which I actually think is harder than just going in and beating with a stick, so to speak, right? Could be harder.
For me, it's easier. I would far rather have a conversation than have a shouting match.
Fair enough. I think that a lot of it, though, can be, especially when money's driven or things are stressful, right? It can be very easy to go with the other approach and not lead with care and compassion.
But, okay, so years ago when I was in management, I had a conversation with a guy. One of those guys works all the hours. It's a driving business, works all the hours, always constantly on overtime, extra days, just wanted to claw as much as he could. Finally, he starts having little stupid accidents. He's coming into work. He looks like crap. So I had the conversation with him. What's going on? Why are you working all these hours? No particular reason. Just wanted the money. Didn't have a lifestyle that he had to fund. Didn't have serious debt. All kinds of. So we had that conversation. And we worked out a plan. I stopped him working as much overtime, pulled him back a little bit. So every other week we'd say, yep, go and claim the overtime. And then every other week, no, you need to take some time out and you need to get some rest. Do you know what? It worked. Sometimes just having a conversation with somebody, finding out what's driving them, finding out what's at the root of the problem, you can come up with a solution that's going to work for both parties. And that is never going to happen if you just go in banging a desk.
No, I agree. Fantastic. Thank you ever so much for the time. For those who want to connect with you, want to hear about your work, want to hear continue this conversation outside of this episode, where is best to reach out to you?
At the moment, LinkedIn. My website is still being updated to recognise the change in or the shift in my career path. But yeah, all my details are on LinkedIn. I'm really easy to find, and I'd love to chat with anyone that wants to talk about stress.
Fantastic. And someone who maybe listening to this, who's got this far in the show, who's dealing with stress, dealing with burnout, is on that kind of precipice potentially of, I don't know what to do, I don't know how to deal with it, I don't know what to do. If you were going to give advice, what advice would you give them?
Speak to somebody. It doesn't matter who it is. Speak to somebody. Don't keep it all in. There are a lot of people around, and if anybody just wants to call for a chat, again, my details are on LinkedIn, and I'm happy just to chat with people, and no obligation, just see if there's anything that I can do to help. But yeah, just find somebody to speak to, share.
Thanks so much for coming back and joining me once again. Ladies and gentlemen, if you did enjoy this podcast episode and took value from it, why not be subscribed so you do not miss next week's episode, where we're going to be trying to move you forward in the best way possible by controlling your mind and the actions you can control, rather than look at the external forces that change in the news cycle and in the economy and etc. like that. So thank you ever so much once again for coming back and joining me once again. Be subscribed so you don't miss next week, and I'll see you very